Colleagues and the witnesses and guests are sub sitting in. Mr. Barrett, welcome to meeting number 8 of the Special Committee on Canada-China Relations, pursuant to the motion adopted on Wednesday, September 23rd, 2020. The committee is meeting on its study of Canada-China relations. La réunion d'aujourd'hui est en format hybride.
Today's meeting is in hybrid format. It's also televised and will be accessible on the House of Commons website.
I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are participating by video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. However, when members are asking you questions, you needn't wait. You don't need to wait for me to recognize you during that period. And then at the end of their time, I'll have to cut off whoever is speaking, as you'll see. Je vous rappelle.
I remind you that all interventions by members and witnesses must be directed to the chair. Please speak slowly and clearly.
Speaking, your mic should be on mute, please. I'd now like to welcome two former ambassadors of Canada to the People's Republic of China, the Honorable John McCallum and Mr. Robert G. Wright. Thank you for being here. Mr. Wright, I guess I'll go to you first for a 2-minute statement, please. And then I'll go to Mr. McCallum. Please proceed. And unmute your mic, don't forget. We just need you to unmute your mic, Mr. Wright. You'll see a button at the bottom left. All right, you'll see a sign that says mute and it will have a red line. If you can, I think you're ready to go now. Thank you.
Am I ready to go?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me to participate tonight. I'm happy to be here. My name is Rob Wright. I was a career public servant for more than 38 years. I served in China as ambassador from 2005 to 2009. Before that, I served as ambassador to Japan from 2001 to 2005. And before that, I was deputy minister of international trade for 6 years, from 1995 to 2001. So my time in China was mostly when Stephen Harper was prime minister. Hu Jintao was president and general secretary in China while I was there. Wen Jiabao was the premier. I retired in May of 2009. That's 11 and a half years ago, and I'm fully retired. I have been since that time. I have done no work in China or Canada since my retirement, although I keep an interest in China, of course, and I am a senior fellow at the China Institute of the University of Alberta. I do give public talks from time to time. If somebody asks to talk about public service or about China, I'm always happy to do that. But other than that, I haven't been engaged at all in any commercial activity. So that's the extent of my opening statement, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wright. Now we'll go to Mr. McCallum. Not your first time at committee. You've got 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Monsieur le Président, membre du comité.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good evening, and thank you for this invitation to be among you this evening. I will make my presentation in English, but of course I'm prepared to answer questions in French.
So I commend the committee for its engagement and interest in the evolving Canada-China relationship. I thought I would outline, in respect of my time as ambassador, what I understood to be the objectives of the Canadian government policy in China and how that changed during my tenure. But I want to highlight for the committee some limitations on what I can say here today. First, I don't intend to offer much comment on events or issues that are currently in front of the government and this parliament. I'm not of the view that governments are anxiously waiting for the policy recommendations of retired ambassadors, ministers, and others. Second, the extradition process for Meng Wanzhou is now before the courts, and so I won't be commenting on that. And finally, I should say I'm here on my own behalf and that my comments are purely personal. In March 2017, I went to China as ambassador with a double mandate from the government to expand our relationship with China and to voice Canada's concerns on values and human rights. I'll give you 3 examples of our actions in the area of human rights. First, I am proud that in 2018, Canada spearheaded a letter from 18 ambassadors to the party secretary of Xinjiang province to request a meeting on the subject of the treatment of Uyghurs. Second, in July 2017, then Governor General Johnson had a 15-minute conversation with President Xi Jinping in which he asked the Chinese government to allow the jailed Nobel laureate Liu Xiaobo to be moved from his prison in China for medical treatment in Germany. Xi Jinping said that Liu Xiaobo was too sick to travel, and it turned out Xi Jinping was right because we learned later that Liu Xiaobo had died on that same day. My third example relates to China's arrest of human rights lawyers in 2015, known as the 709 crackdown. I particularly remember Li Wenju, the very brave wife of one of the lawyers who had not had any contact with her husband for more than 2 years, and who told me she was concerned because her husband had a stubborn streak. She met our prime minister and also Angela Merkel. We made representations to the Chinese regarding these human rights lawyers, and eventually Li Wenzu's husband was released. We addressed security issues on a case-by-case basis with our focus on what we thought to be Canada's national interest. On the one hand, we worked with the Chinese on major criminal cases and on efforts to reduce the production and export of amphetamines to Canada. On the other hand, we turned down Chinese requests for an extradition treaty, and we also turned down a good number of official visa applications in cases where we felt the applicant's activities in Canada may not be in the national interest. I believe I fulfilled the dual mandate I had received from the government. We were active on human rights issues and awake to Canada's security concerns, while at the same time pursuing a policy of enhanced engagement with China. This approach permitted a positive Canada-China relationship. Both sides were keen to pursue mutually beneficial opportunities, while also speaking frankly but respectfully on the issues that divided us. Everything changed in December 2018 with the arrest of Meng Wanzhou in Vancouver, resulting from a US extradition request, closely followed by the detention of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor in China. From that moment onwards, the top priority of the government and of myself as ambassador was to secure the release of the 2 Michaels. I was in frequent touch with their family members, as well as with ambassadors of like-minded governments. As one of relatively few Canadians who actually visited the 2 Michaels in detention, I was determined to do whatever I could to secure their release. On more than one occasion, I tried to convince the Chinese that if they were unable to release Kovrig and Spavor, they should at least improve their living conditions. Sadly, as you all know, Canadian efforts in this area have so far been unsuccessful.
Mr. McCallum, excuse
Yes.
me, I'm afraid your 5 minutes are up. Perhaps you'll have opportunities during the question and answer period to, obviously you'll have time to add more.
Okay.
So now we'll go to the first round of questions, beginning with Mr. Jennis for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McCallum, I'd like to ask if you have any regrets about actions you took or statements you made as ambassador. Is there any thing for which you wish to take this opportunity to apologize, either to Parliament or to the Canadian people?
Well, I think I've done some useful things in my career, like Syrian refugees, defense minister under Craig Chen when we said no to Iraq, and Nelson Mandela's citizenship, but I've never claimed to have led an error-free career. And so I have made a number of errors over the years. And since you asked me, I will mention one. I was invited to a meeting with Chinese government officials in the summer of 2019, and my purpose was to try to get them to release the two Michaels, or at least improve their living conditions. So I painted a dark picture of plummeting support for China among Canadians. And I also mentioned, as part of this darkness, an impending election. Now, in hindsight, I regret having spoken of the election. I don't think it was appropriate. So that is one misstatement I believe I made. I don't think it made any difference, because at the end of the day, the Chinese refused to release or even improve the living conditions of our two detainees. But that was an error I made. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you, Mr. McCallum, and I do appreciate your humility in acknowledging that. I would question the assertion that it didn't make a difference. The efforts of the Chinese government to influence Canadian society and Canadian politics are well documented. So, do you think it is reasonable to suppose that your intimation that you think a liberal government would be better for the Chinese state than a conservative government could have influenced the direction of Chinese government influence operations?
I don't really know what they do. They don't confide in me. I've said to you, I thought that was a misstatement. It was something I should not have said. It could have been subject to misinterpretation. It had no effect, in the sense that my sole objective was to build a case to favor the two Michaels, and it had no effect on that. But it was still an inappropriate statement. I acknowledge that point.
Thank you, Minister. I wonder if you regret any of the comments you made with respect to the Meng Wanzhou case.
Well, I did. You're probably referring to a press conference I gave in Markham, where I tried to describe the overall situation. So I began by saying that that we believe that the two Michaels had been arbitrarily detained, and we were working with other countries to try to get them released as quickly as possible. I also gave some description of the Meng Wanzhou case. I made some comments about how the burden of proof is lower for extradition cases, so that went against her. But I also commented on some of the legal arguments she might have, which I just picked up from the media. The case was not at that point before the courts, so I'm not sure that what I said was inappropriate. I know some people thought it was, but I was really just trying to give to this group the overall lay of the land of the situation with regard to China at that time.
Okay, Minister, just so your comments are understood, it sounds like you're saying that you maintain that the comments you made in that press conference about Meng Wanzhou were acceptable. I just want your meaning to be fully understood.
Yeah, well, the comment about the election, I think, was inappropriate. The overall comments about the situation with our two detainees in Meng Wanzhou in Markham, I thought were okay.
Okay, thank you for clarifying your views on that. Do you believe that the United Front division of the Chinese Communist Party is operating in Canada? And also, much has been written about the phenomenon of elite capture, whereby Western elites are brought under the influence of Chinese government through gifts and other enticements. Do you believe that the committee should be concerned about the phenomenon of elite capture in Canada by the Chinese Communist Party and by the United Front and Works Department?
Well, I would assume you are implying that I might be one of those elites. But
if you
I
believe
assure you
the
that-
committee should be concerned about that phenomenon, Mr. McCallum. I wasn't asking about you in the context of that question.
Okay. I think that certainly I think that sometimes Chinese people come to Canada for inappropriate purposes. And that is why we turned down a number of visas, because we felt that they were likely to be doing inappropriate things in Canada of various kinds, as you described. As to whether you should, I think there is this idea of requiring former ambassadors to list the clients for whom they work. I think right now we are not able to divulge the names of our clients, but if
Thank you.
that
Thank you.
law was in place, we would comply.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McCallum. Thank you, Mr. Jennis. We'll now go on to Mr. Oliphant for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to
6 minutes,
thank
excuse me.
I want to thank both Mr. Wright and Mr. McCallum for joining us tonight. We're honored by your presence. I'm going to start with Mr. McCallum. I just wanted to note that you're an accomplished academic and practicing economist. You're a seasoned politician and a longtime public servant. You've served as Canada's diplomat in a complex and difficult appointment. So I want to begin by thanking you for that life of work. And unlike my conservative colleague, this is not going to be an interrogation. I'm actually less interested in the past than I am in the future. You don't report to us, but what we would like you to do tonight, and both of you, is to help us. We genuinely want to learn from you so that our committee can give a report to Parliament and to government that can actually further the relationship that Canada has with China. I've been to China twice, once when you were ambassador. That was a good trip. Once when you weren't ambassador, it was an okay trip. You've been to China many times and you served for almost 2 years as our ambassador. So you know more than I do, and I think more than anybody on the committee. The work of this committee, we've been hearing two stories. One is, on the one hand, we hear about the importance of engaging with China economically, socially, culturally. We hear about it from the need of our farmers and their markets. We hear about it from the need of a relationship between scientists and researchers, academics and entrepreneurs who want a relationship with China, and how that is a reality in today's world by their sheer size and import. On the other hand, we hear they don't follow the rules, that they're not predictable or dependable. The international rules-based order is not being followed. It's not a level playing field, and we have concerns about how it is we are to accomplish that engagement, importantly, and deal with a partner that doesn't play by the same rules we would. And so we're at that position where Canada's looking into the future to say, how do we do that? And I'm wondering, from your experience, can you advise us? We're trying to come up, and I think the government's very clear. They're writing a new China policy. The China of 2016 is not the same as the China of 2020. Is there advice you can give to us on how to deal with that dilemma?
Well, thank you very much for your question, and I'm delighted to see some familiar faces again. I think China is always a two-track issue, as I described in my comments. On the one hand, my job was to try to expand ties with China. On the other hand, it was to express our values over on human rights. And I think over time that has evolved, but since 2018 or 17, issues against China have increased substantially, primarily through our two detainees, but also through other events such as more information we now have about Uyghurs and about Hong Kong, and you know the list. So I think at the end of the day, the government may or may not wish to take stronger measures vis-a-vis China. I'm not here to comment one way or the other on that, but I think that is one of the things the government is looking at. And I think now that we're thankfully about to get a Biden administration, that could have an effect on the overall global direction in terms of China-US and China-Western world relations. And I think that is very important. But at the end of the day, I would just say that China will remain important to Canadian universities, Canadian farmers. I think we'll still want their tourists. And so I don't think it's a question of closing down those economic activities, but it's always a case of balancing those two sides of China.
Thank you. Mr. Wright, I wonder if you want to add any comments on that.
Oh, sure. Well, let me start by saying that since I retired in 2009, of course, China has changed remarkably. They've become more assertive, and we've seen evidence of this in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. And John McCallum's referred to the situation in Hong Kong and, of course, in Xinjiang province. Those are very worrying trends. And China is much more willing now, it would seem, to use coercive diplomacy or even hostage diplomacy than they were at the time I was there. When I was there, I found the Chinese tough, difficult to deal with, but always open to input from Canadians. We had relatively easy access to whoever we wanted to talk to at that point in time. I'm not sure that situation is still the case today. I'm just not close enough to be able to say. I do think we can pursue a relationship of closer economic cooperation and at the same time not be naive about the actions that China is taking here in Canada and around the world. We have the capacity to do that. We know that China is active in different areas that we're not comfortable with here in Canada. We know that they don't always play by the rules, but we can work with colleagues from other countries. We can develop multilateral approaches, I think, to deal with those difficulties and still engage economically and in other areas with the Chinese. I don't see it as being one or the other.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Chair.
Wright and Mr. Oliphant. Et maintenant, on va continuer.
We'll now continue with Mr. Bergeron for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being with us tonight, gentlemen. We have a great deal to learn from your experience. You were privileged witnesses to what went on in People's Republic of China, and up to now we had the privilege of meeting and hearing many of your predecessors and successors in some cases who explained their point of view. I'm very happy to see you again, Mr. McCallum. You were leaving the House of Commons when I came back. So it's a pleasure to have you with us tonight. Now, to get back to the interventions of other ambassadors of Canada to China, Mr. Howard Balloch, who last March highlighted 3 premises that seem to recur, that are often erroneous, about the People's Republic of China and relations between Canada and that country. I want to insist on the third one. The third one is the premise according to which it's sufficient to have a global policy that's coherent to correct the trajectory of Canada in this immense and complex China. The government announced, without unveiling it, and we understood that there wasn't any unveiling anticipated, they announced a new policy with regard to the People's Republic of China. Given this third premise that was presented by Howard Balloch, and in light of your personal experiences, is the government on the wrong track in thinking that by developing and presenting a new policy, we will manage to face this new China that we're dealing with today?
Okay. C'est un plaisir aussi.
It's also a pleasure for me to be here and to see you again, Mr. Bergeron. I don't know what this new policy by the government will be. As the minister said, I believe China policy is evolving. The situation when I was ambassador is not the same as it is today. So the policy has to evolve. And especially given the problem of the 2 Michaels, that's a serious, grave situation for Canada. I think there are reasons why the government wants to change its policy for those reasons. I think the arrival of Mr. Biden could have an effect as well. I don't want to give advice to the government as a retired ambassador, but I think it's natural to think, given the evolution of things, that perhaps we need new policies regarding China. But I agree with my colleague that Canada in the future will have to do the two things we've always done, support our economic interests and support our values and the question of human rights. Thank you, Mr. McCallum. Mr. Wright?
Well, thank you. I'm not sure what premise Howard may have made, but I certainly see the need these days for the government to reassess the approach to China. I think it's timely. I look forward to seeing what they have to say. As I say, things have changed dramatically from the time when I was there, when we had easier access and a more cordial exchange with the Chinese, and where I can say in all honesty that the Chinese listened carefully to what we had to say. They may not have agreed with us, but they did listen carefully to what we have to say. And my impression now is that it's much more difficult than it was then. So I wish the government well, and I look forward to hearing what their recommendations are for the future.
Merci.
Thank you. We know that there are over 600 people who work for Canada in the People's Republic of China, or at least in the broader China. Of those 600 or 650 people, about 500 are local employees. Given the efforts deployed by the People's Republic of China to try and influence the interventions of various countries in relation to itself, even abroad, don't you think there's a risk that the regime in place is trying to influence local residents in the PRC on its own territory? And people who work for foreign countries? What are the measures put in place to ensure the integrity of the people who work for Canada in the People's Republic of China, or at least in the broader China? Are you talking about employees in the embassy? Yes, the embassy, consulates, and generally speaking, all the employees who work for Canada, at least 500, are local Chinese people. Okay, now I understand. I always said that these local employees are absolutely critical for what we do in China. They have the knowledge we need. We have to be careful, yes, but it's extremely important for embassy operations. Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron. Now, Mr. Harris.
6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank you both former ambassadors. A point of order, Mr. Chair. I'm getting an echo in my ear here. If I could.
Okay, I've just stopped the time for a minute to see if we can fix that with the technicians. Do you have it on the channel? Although it sometimes doesn't matter.
Maybe it's stopped.
On English.
It's on. I'm on English, and I was getting it delayed. A delayed repeat of my voice, but it seems to have disappeared at the moment. If I may,
all right,
start the time again.
Please go ahead then.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank former Ambassador Wright, and former ambassador and former colleague of mine in the House of Commons, Mr. McCallum, for joining us tonight. I think we overlapped from 2008 to 2015, most of which time I was defense critic for the NDP, and we had many conversations. May I start with asking Mr. Wright about his time? And I think it's important to try to understand a little bit about what the relationship was and what the expectations might have been about China and China's future at that time. I'm guessing, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Wright, that having been a former Deputy Minister of International Trade, that part of the reason why you were appointed to this role would have been your ability to deal with trade matters and presumably with Canadian investment issues in China, which I gather were fairly robust at the time. You know, the issues of Hong Kong, we've heard a lot about the last a couple of years. Hong Kong was in the early stages of the, or partway through the early stages of the after the handover. Could you just describe the sense of what Hong Kong was doing and what the expectations were for China?
Well, there certainly were great expectations for the future of Canada-China trade. That's correct, and investment. And that was an important part of our portfolio. The portfolio of any ambassador is much broader than economic interests, of course, and we pursued actively human rights questions as well as questions related to educational exchanges, scientific exchanges, and what have you. So it was a broad agenda, but trade and investment was an important part of it. And at that point in time, this is from 2005 to 2009, there was a great sense of optimism, both here in Canada and in China, I would say, that the prospects for trade between our two countries and investment were very strong. The Harper government was not terribly well disposed to China initially, and it took some time for them to develop confidence that this was a relationship worth investing in. But after the visit by a range of ministers in the Harper government, there became a growing recognition of the fact that that the relationship could grow, and that indeed, in the growth of the relationship, we could have some influence on the direction that China would take. With reference to Hong Kong, Hong Kong was then a very strong economy, one where, of course, there are up to 300,000 Canadians. And so it was easy for Canadian business people to do business there and to establish business relationships with Hong Kong and through Hong Kong with the mainland. I don't know now whether that situation is still the case, but I'm discouraged, I'm disappointed, of course, at developments over recent years, in particular with the implementation of the security law, that some of the confidence of the business community in Hong Kong has disappeared. And of course, there's now a recognition of the fact that the opportunities for business people to work more closely with Hong Kong in the future may have been affected. I still remain optimistic with Hong Kong simply because the people of Hong Kong are great entrepreneurs. They're globalists. They're interested in doing business in all parts of the world. And my hope would be that the mainland, that China would live up to its obligations under the transition agreement and allow them to continue as a important part of the Chinese economy, but also an important part of the global economy.
Mr. Harris, we're not hearing you. I'm just going to hold for a moment. I paused when I was muted as well, but you weren't muted. You just we weren't hearing you. Let's see if we can. Would you please keep talking, and we'll see if we start hearing you again. Mr. Harris, can you hear me? You've not. No, you're muted now. But a moment ago you weren't muted, but we stopped hearing you.
I'm afraid I've done even worse.
No, now it's going, so I'll get your time going again, and you can carry on, please.
Okay, thank you. Am I right in saying that the events of the last several years, including the democracy activities, pro-democracy demonstrations going on for some years, was any of this foretold during your period as ambassador in China, or is that something that was all after you left?
It was all after I left.
So things were going well at that time. So things have changed, and I guess the One of the other premises of, or the false premise, and I'll get to Mr. McCollum, I think, the next round, but the premise that the policy of broad and fulsome engagement has failed, and that it was principally and naively aimed at changing China internally. Now, he calls that a fallacious premise. What do you think of that? Is that is it over, that this idea that China will change because of engagement?
You know, I don't know. I like to think not. I've believed throughout my career that engagement is better than the alternative, and so I still believe that there's room for Canada to influence the direction that China takes. I think we must stay fully engaged in that country and in Hong Kong to try to influence directions they take. Clearly, it's become more difficult over the last 5 or 6 years, or ever since 2013, when Xi Jinping became president of China. There has been a shift in my view, a shift in the willingness of China to listen to input from other countries around the world. And I regret this because for the period that I was there, as I say, China was more open to ideas from Canada and from other countries.
And this may require a shift by us.
Thanks very much, Mr. Harris. Thank you, Mr. Wright. And now we go to Mr. Barrett. We're in the second round now, pardon me, and we'll go to Mr. Barrett. Welcome for 5 minutes.
Hey, thanks very much, Chair. Pleasure to join this evening as the official opposition shadow minister for ethics. My question for Mr. McCollum, sir, what is your relationship to the Wayland Group?
Oh, are you talking about the talk I gave about immigration?
Any of your work for that group, sir?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Stop the time, excuse me. Mr. Oliphant, point of order.
I would just like the member to clarify how this applies to the mandate of our.
That's not a matter of order, Mr. Oliphant.
It is.
One person
I would
at a
like
time,
a clarification
please.
that we have a standing order that we are following, and I would like to understand how that relates to the mandate of this committee, which has a mandate to investigate the relationship of Canada and China and our bilateral relationship, including many issues. But I don't know how that applies to our mandate as a committee.
Mr. Chair, on that point of order,
Mr. Jennings, I'm just going to ask that I will recognize you, but of course I want to ask that you wait until I recognize you before speaking. Please go ahead.
I just want to say that it's quite striking that the parliamentary secretary intervenes after there's been one line of questioning from the conservative ethics critic. If he's going to complain about relevance, he could at least wait to hear the direction that my colleague is going.
This is debate, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Fragiskatis, Mr. Jennings has the floor. Thank you.
But I agree with Mr. Fragiskatos that the point of order for Mr. Oliphant was a point of debate, and we should get back to the questions.
Thank you both. Of course, I asked you to respect the mandate of the committee, and Mr. Barrett, the floor is again yours.
So my question is for you, Mr. McCollum, with respect to the nature of your relationship with the Wayland Group.
I gave a talk to some of their clients who were thinking about immigrating to Canada, and that became controversial in a Globe and Mail article. It was natural for me to encourage Chinese or other foreigners to immigrate to Canada because I have for many years thought that immigration was good for Canada. But in light of the Globe and Mail article, which alleged that I had done something wrong in terms of the rules, which I did not think I had, I submitted evidence to the ethics commissioner, and I had a conversation with the ethics commissioner, and he agreed with me that I had done nothing wrong, that I had broken no rules, that he was not going to launch any investigation. And he said to me that I could report this to the public. So I am now reporting it, and I broke no rules according to the ethics commissioner in giving that talk to that group of people when I was in China.
Did you have interactions with them, with that group, while you were serving as ambassador?
No, I'd never met them when I was serving as ambassador.
Thank you. Had you communicated with Minister Mendicino about your work with the Whalen Group or Chinese immigration following your tenure as ambassador?
No, I had a conversation with Minister Mendicino at his initiative, which was a general conversation about what he should do about levels of immigration post-pandemic. And we had a talk about that. And we did not even talk about China, as I recall, and certainly not about any of my clients. And when I spoke to those clients, I mentioned something that Mr. Mendicino said, but it was fully in the public domain. So it was not inside information. And so I put all that to the ethics commissioner, and he agreed there was nothing wrong with any of that.
Have you communicated with anyone at the Chinese embassy here at home since your resignation as ambassador?
I was invited to lunch once a long time ago before the pandemic with the current Chinese ambassador, and I had lunch with him.
And what was the nature of the meeting, sir?
Just I had known him in China when I was ambassador, and I guess it was just a social occasion, I suppose. Okay. But I just had lunch with him, and that's all.
Do you agree that a foreign agent's registry? Sorry. Do you agree that a foreign agent's registry is needed for Canada? It's been proposed by former Canadian ambassadors to China, David Mulroney, and endorsed by another former ambassador, Guy Saint-Jacques.
Well, I would certainly obviously comply if there were such a thing. Right now, I cannot divulge names of clients, but we would find a way to do that if that were the law. It wouldn't really bother me if the government wished to do that. It's not a decision for me. It's a decision for the government. I wonder if you're asking me for my opinion, right now, advice I give to Chinese companies is advice on if they're seeking to invest in Canada, create jobs in Canada, but they're already subject to all the restrictions of Investment Canada Act and also all the laws of Canada and provinces and cities and regulations. So if the government wants to do that, that's the government's business, and I would comply. I'm just not sure it gives additional information that would be useful to the government. I might be wrong, but that's my initial impression.
20 seconds.
Just very quickly, in your time as a member, you received $73,000 in paid traveler gifts from the Chinese Communist Party or groups affiliated with them. Did gifts of this nature continue during your time as ambassador, sir?
The only government of China I have ever received money from is the government of Taiwan. When I went on a trip there with my wife many years ago, I have not received a penny from the government of mainland China as ambassador, as MP, or post-ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Monies
Barrett.
for those trips came from Government of Canada or NGOs.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. McCallum, Mr. Barrett. We'll now go to Mr. Frederick for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to both witnesses for appearing tonight. Mr. McCallum, great to see you again. I certainly have questions for you relating to the topic, but I simply want to thank you again for the work that you did specifically on Syrian refugee resettlement and Yazidi refugee resettlement. Both communities are thriving in London, due in large part to efforts such as yours, from people such as you and those around you. You mentioned in your opening statement that there were achievements, and I think important achievements relating to your time as ambassador. Could you highlight a few of those again?
Well, I think that, as I said, I had this double mandate. On the one hand, to pursue greater economic ties. On the other hand, to stand up for human rights and our values. And I spoke mainly about the latter because I think that's what many members of the committee are more interested in. And so I was I don't want to discuss these things for the future now, but I'm happy to discuss when I was ambassador. We did play a leading role in leading the charge, if you like, among like-minded Western ambassadors on the Uyghur issue. So I was pleased that we did that. And we did not have nearly as much information back then as we have now, but we were certainly leading the efforts to get those 28 ambassadors to sign this letter. I remembered I tried to expand it outside the usual group of countries to leading Muslim countries, and I didn't succeed in the end, but I got some interest. So that was a pretty major effort on our part when I was ambassador, as well as those other items that I mentioned.
Thank you very much. The question of the Uyghurs and what is being perpetrated is a matter that has concerned this committee and other committees in Parliament, as you well know. You're saying that Canada led the effort during your time as ambassador to raise the issue on the global stage, or help to lead the effort?
It's hard to define if we were the one country most leading the effort. We were clearly right up there, and we did lead the effort on this letter that was signed by the 28 ambassadors to the party secretary of Xinjiang province. We definitely led that, and I would say we were very active in general.
I appreciate that. I wanted to turn to Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright, thank you for your previous service, of course. I want to ask you a question relating to how liberal democracies can best coalesce together to counter the influence of a China that certainly has changed in recent years under its new leadership. The point has been made at this committee, and I think it's one that deserves serious consideration. I'm glad that the government seems to be basing its foreign policy approach to China on it, and this is the recognition that liberal democracies should come together around common and shared values to engage and to confront China, if I can put it that way. That is an argument that has been made, as I said, by previous witnesses and by the foreign minister last night. My question to you is, what do you think of that perspective? And number two, if you're in favor of that, will it have an impact? Does China care, is my question. Sir, sorry, you're on mute.
Mute.
There you go. I can hear you now.
I apologize. Yes, I strongly support working with other liberal democracies, with other Western countries to talk about how we should engage with China and how we might influence the directions that China takes. I still believe that there is prospects that China will adjust as it becomes more involved globally. I think we can take certain very
Mr. Wright, I'm afraid you're frozen. So are you just saying, I think we can take certain, please go ahead.
Can I continue?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Okay. I just mentioned the fact that the Trans-Pacific Partnership that we joined a couple of years ago is a good initiative. That means we'll be working with other countries in the region to promote trade and investment. I know from experience when I was in China, and I'm sure it was the same when John was there, that we work closely with ambassadors from other countries to talk about developments in China and how we might cooperate to try to advance common ideas. So I remain, if not optimistic, realistic about the prospect of changing things in the short term. But I think it is a pursuit well worth pursuing. And as I was saying a little bit earlier, I think the fact that the U.S. government, the president-elect and his team has already indicated they want to work more closely with partners on global issues, including relationships with China, is a very positive sign.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Fragiscatos. Et maintenant, Monsieur Bergeron.
Now, Mr. Bergeron, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. McCallum, for the answer that you were giving me earlier. I think it's very important, and I understand the reason why it's so important, regardless of the country in the world, that we have local employees who are connected with the realities of their country. But in the particular case of the People's Republic of China, given the concerns about security that have been explained in the past days and weeks, my concern is that Although I don't contest the importance of these employees, what measures were in place during your time as ambassador to ensure the integrity of the locally hired people to do work in Canadian missions on Chinese territory? And thank you very much, because I didn't have enough time to answer you earlier. But as I said, those employees are absolutely critical. About 3/4 of our employees are locals, and they have the knowledge. But at the same time, there are security issues, you're right, certainly, and that's why we don't give these people access to some information, to some computers, and we're very strict about that. And perhaps more recently, since I left, they're more aware of those security issues, so perhaps they've become even stricter. I don't know. But I think we're aware of that challenge of security. We do take measures, but at the same time, our operations couldn't work without the support of those local employees. Could Mr. Wright add to that?
Completely with what John make up a very important part of our embassy as well as our consulates around China. There is a hard line that we draw between access to information, access to important information that is open to Canadians and closed to Chinese citizens. We recognize that fact. And so we, even over the time I was there, that was very carefully maintained, and I'm sure that's still the case.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Bergeron.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron.
1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and Mr. McCollum. As I said earlier, good to see you again. When you were appointed from cabinet, I guess, to the position, there was a little bit of surprise. That normally had been a post which was reserved for career diplomats, and you have a lot of political experience. But do you think that your association with the government, the actual government, and the party in power, was that a factor in your work and what you were able to do? Was there some reason that was an important consideration?
Well, look, I think you have to go back
and having
realize,
you go to China, and there was a difference in the way you worked as a result of that.
Sorry if I interrupted you, and nice to see you again. I think it's a delicate matter how many political appointments you make versus diplomatic. And recently in the US, it's gone the other way with the diplomatic appointments. So that's good for the diplomatic service. But in my case, I think there was a desire back then. And remember, we said 2016 is not 2020. So the attitudes were different. We wanted to up our game with China. And it was thought that if they appointed a politician to be ambassador and put China on the same level as the United States and UK and France, that would be well perceived by the Chinese, and that would help Canada achieve its objectives. And so I think that was part of the thinking behind my appointment.
Thank you for clarifying that. I have a short, it's sort of a short question. Was there any doubt in your mind, Mr. McCollum, when the Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig were seized several days after Meng Wanzhou was arrested in Vancouver? Was there any doubt in your mind that there was a connection between those two?
No doubt. Put it this way, if Meng Wanzhou had not been arrested, I am very confident that the two Michaels would not have been arrested either.
Was that ever acknowledged by the Chinese authorities in your presence?
Not explicitly, but there were a few times when it came close to an implicit acknowledgement.
I think my time is up, Mr. Chair. Your fingers
You
are
have
getting
about 3 seconds left.
Your fingers are getting a lot closer. Thank you, Mr. McCollum.
I'm trying to give indications to members of what the time is that's left. So I appreciate members watching that and doing their best to stay within their time. And now we'll go to Mr. Chong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McCallum, good to see you again. I hope you're doing well. For those of you who haven't read it, I recommend your book, which was based on your PhD thesis, Unequal Beginnings, about the Ontario wheat boom in the 19th century. I remember reading it while I was procrastinating at Robarts Library at U of T many years ago. And Mr. Wright, good to see you as well. My first question is for Mr. Wright, that was asked previously to Mr. McCallum. Mr. Wright, a foreign agent registry has been proposed by former ambassadors David Mulrooney and Guy Saint-Jacques. A foreign agent registry has been put in place in Australia. My question is, do you think a foreign agent registry is needed for Canada?
It's not something I've thought about. I have to be honest with you. It wasn't something that was discussed while I was serving in China. But I would have no reason not to support it. I don't think it's a bad idea. Just for the record, I'm very clear. I have no clients that are Chinese or Canadian, so it wouldn't bother me. But I could see some merit in doing so, particularly given the concerns that have been raised recently about China, the effect of certain Chinese representatives in Canada.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to talk about Canadians wrongfully detained. According to Foreign Affairs, thousands of Canadians are imprisoned in more than 85 countries around the world, some 1,400 Canadians at last count. Foreign Affairs has also said that it is aware of 123 Canadians detained in Chinese jails. One thing that has confounded me is this. Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig are two of those Canadians detained, but there are also Canadians like Hussein Jalil and Robert Schellenberg. Hussein Jalil is, just to remind everyone, is a Canadian of Uyghur origin who is still detained in China, and Robert Schellenberg is a Canadian who is now on death row in China. Mr. Wright, why does the government make the release of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig the priority, but not other Canadians wrongfully detained like Hussein Jalil? I'm wondering if you could give us your perspective on that.
I was in China when Hussein Jalil was detained. He was detained by the Chinese as a Chinese citizen. In fact, he was traveling on a Canadian passport. And in fact, as I think you probably know, we were never given consular access to Mr. Jalil, despite the fact that he was and is a Canadian citizen. So that is an issue of some regret for me that over the course of my time in China, we were never given access. And as you know, he was subsequently sentenced and is still serving time in China. I don't think that the government is giving, I can't speak for recent years, but I don't think the government is giving greater attention to one or another issue, detainee over another. My own sense is that the government, and I know this from my experience in Beijing, my experience as ambassador, we pay close attention to all Canadians who are detained. I think the nature of the way that the two Michaels were detained, as it would seem, in direct retaliation for the arrest for Madame Meng Wanzhou, is something that has clearly captured the attention of Canadians, and rightfully so. Okay. So I can understand why Canadians feel particularly strongly about this, but that's not to say that Canadian officials in China and in Global Affairs Canada aren't paying a lot of attention to the other detainees as well.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. McCallum, you mentioned in your opening comments that beginning in 2018, the Liberal cabinet decided to make the release of the two Michaels a priority in the Canada-China bilateral relationship. Why are those two Canadians a priority and not a Canadian like Hussein Jalil? Is it because Hussein Jalil has a second citizenship, or is there another reason?
Look, I remember I did make representations on behalf of Hussein Jalil in China, and I also spoke to people about him in Ottawa when I was ambassador. I did visit Mr. Schellenberg when he was in jail, and I spoke to his father. So it's not as if we were not concerned about those people. But I do think that, as Rob said, that the fact that the two Michaels were seized in apparent retaliation for the Meng Wanzhou case has caught Canadians' imagination as something different and particularly unwelcome. And so I think it has gotten more high-level attention for sure.
Thank you
But
very
it
much.
doesn't
Sorry,
reduce
Mr.
the
McCallum.
importance
Mr.
of these
McCallum,
others.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr.
Sorry.
Chong is up. Et maintenant, je dois procéder à...
So now I have to go to Mr. Duboul for 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And it's my turn to welcome Mr. Wright and Mr. McCallum, our former ambassadors. And I thank you for your many years of service in the public service. That's very interesting. Look, my first question is for Mr. McCallum. In the time that you were ambassador, Mr. McCallum, you said earlier that you took part in freeing Li Wanzhou, and you even revoked a number of visas of Chinese nationals. That kind of action or gesture, is that common for an ambassador to do those things? When officials make visa applications to visit Canada from China, our security officers always examine these applications because we are aware of those problems, as we discussed. As ambassador, I was concerned too, and I remember a number of cases where we said no because we had concerns. Very sure we weren't absolutely certain, but we had some notion that these people might not do appropriate things in Canada. So we had that option. I think it happens. It probably varies according to the state of relations between the two countries. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're stricter now in 2020 than we were when I was there, because the nature of our relationship has deteriorated. But I think that this is something we've always done. Thank you. Thank you very much. My next question would be for Mr. Wright. I know that you left your position as ambassador for a long time now, but you do closely follow the news. And I'm wondering, what was your reaction when you saw the imposition of this security legislation and then those elected officials who resigned? I'd like to know what you think about these things. What were your reactions?
Well, I was disappointed, of course, and I can't say I was shocked, because if you follow China, you could see increasingly over recent years that the government was becoming more and more worried, the Chinese government, about democratic developments in Hong Kong. So I can't say I was shocked, but I was very disappointed, because Hong Kong has always provided a very nice transition between the autocratic, non-democratic People's Republic of China and the rest of the world. And so, and they served a useful role, I thought, to China as well as to the rest of the world in playing that role. And I was very disappointed to see that the efforts of the people of Hong Kong to express themselves through democratic means was dealt with the way it was by China. You could see over recent years, ever since 2013, well after I left, that the Chinese government has become more assertive in its efforts to crack down on any form of dissent. And I think this is an unfortunate result of it. And I'm sorry for the people of Hong Kong, and I'm particularly sorry for the 300,000 Canadians who live there and who have very close ties with China as well as with Canada.
Thank you. Thank you so much, both of you. I think that I got no more times left, and thank you so much.
Merci.
Oh. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci beaucoup. And we'll now we'll go on. We have the last half hour, so we'll treat this part of it as if we're starting a new hour, and we'll go to Mr. Jennis for 6 minutes.
Okay, Mr. Chair. Could I really want to drill down with Mr. McCallum on this issue of visa applications that were rejected, because we seem to be dancing around the reasons why this might have happened, references to activities that weren't appropriate or that weren't to the national interest. Who were these people for whom you felt it was necessary to reject visa applications? Were they affiliated with the Chinese military, the United Front? What kinds of titles did they have? What kinds of purposes were they pursuing in Canada that led you to believe that our security or our interests would have been threatened by granting the visas?
I think there were probably two categories. And as I said, we were not always absolutely certain about this. There was a fog of uncertainty, and we also had information from security agencies who had views as well. But if one thing we certainly would not approve of at all is if there were individuals coming on behalf of Chinese security agencies to pressure family members either to return to China or threatening their families, things of that nature. And I know there had been cases of that, and that was one area which we would strongly oppose. A second area, as you indicate, would be people who wanted to try to exert inappropriate influence on the Chinese diaspora. And again, we didn't always know for sure what everybody was up to, but when the weight of suspicions were sufficient, we would deny a visa. And I can't say the proportion, but I remember a pretty substantial number.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think this is important in revealing that back in the time when you were ambassador, you were aware of efforts to influence and even threaten the security of the Chinese diaspora in Canada, and that visas were being denied on that basis. Were you ever aware of cases where the government revoked existing visas or pulled the credentials of diplomats out of concern for the same kind of activity?
I can't think of any. I know there was a case where the Chinese wanted to have some sort of security agent in Vancouver, and we had suspicions, or it was more the RCMP had suspicions. So that was denied. They offered him a position in Ottawa, but they weren't interested. That actually provoked quite a long-lasting disagreement or bad relations between the RCMP and the Chinese counterparts. So I think the Canadian government agencies were onto this sort of thing at the time. I'm not saying it was rampant, but it certainly happened. And whenever we were thinking that it might happen, we tried to stop it.
Ambassador, were there ever cases where the RCMP raised concerns, but a visa was granted anyways?
Oh, was that for me or?
Yes, for you, Mr. McCallum.
I honestly don't remember. I think there were certain cases where CSIS or the RCMP would simply say no, and we wouldn't have a choice. And there might have been others where there was a recommendation, and on occasion we might have disagreed with them. I don't remember.
Mr. McCallum, if there are any records with respect to that can be given to the committee or the Global Affairs can share with the committee, I think we'd very much like to see that. I'll give the rest of my time to Mr. Paul Hoos.
Merci, Garnet.
Thank you, Garnet. Mr. McCallum, yesterday the Minister of Foreign Affairs came to the committee, Mr. Champagne, and he clearly stated that the China of 2020 had nothing to do with the China of 2018, 2015, or before. Today you're saying the same thing. China's existed for millennium, Canada for about 150 years. We're doing business with them. But I think there's some hypocrisy that's always existed. And now the arrest of the two Michaels as reprisal has opened up the eyes of Canada, and the minister told us that. So my question is, how can Canada continue to do business with China in the same way, continue to have relations with China in the same way as before, when it's clear to everyone now that you cannot trust the Chinese Communist Party for any interaction? What would be your best advice to conclude? I think that the government is trying to find a good solution. It's true that we're going through a difficult period here. It's not easy to find the right answer, but the government's doing its best. I'm not part of the government anymore, but I know they're doing their best. But do you believe that this government is able to do anything? Do you believe that we can trust the Chinese Communist regime now that we know everything that's going on? It's a relative question. Yes, we want a relationship with the Chinese government. And Canada does not control who that government is. This is not easy, but that is a task. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Paulus.
Go to Ms. Zan for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And my first question is for Mr. Wright, and my next question will be for Mr. McCallum. In January of 2019, a number of academics and retired diplomats, including former ambassadors such as yourself, Mr. Wright, signed a letter that expressed deep concern about the detentions of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. In that you wrote, and I quote, "We who share Mr. Kovrig's and Mr. Spavor's enthusiasm for building genuine, productive, and lasting relationships must now be more cautious about traveling and working in China and engaging our Chinese counterparts." So the two Michaels, as we call them, have been detained now since December of 2018, as you know. And on the 4th of February of this year, Global Affairs Canada informed this special committee that there are actually 123 Canadians detained in Greater China, which includes Hong Kong and Taiwan. So what are the conditions under which Canadians are generally held when detained in China? And what is the most effective approach to advocating for the release of detained Canadians in China? For instance, what approaches adopted by other countries have been most effective?
Those are tough questions. The first part of it, I think the way in which they're maintained, the conditions in which they're maintained are very difficult. There's no question about that. And we are given consular access to most Canadians who are detained in China. We report back that their conditions are tough. We work with, to the extent that we can influence the government of China on their form of detention, we do so. What's the best means to try to deal with this? My own view is that little is achieved by shouting publicly, loudly at the Chinese on these issues. My own experience over the period I was in China was that headlines on the front pages of newspapers about Chinese actions and about the fact that Chinese Canadians were detained in Chinese prisons didn't help resolve the issue. What helped was contact, deliberate, ongoing diplomatic contact with Chinese officials, working with them to ensure that the Canadian citizens were treated fairly, and that we had access to them and they were given, to the extent possible, a fair hearing under Chinese law. Whenever we increased the public pressure on certain high-profile cases. I found the management of the relationship with China became more difficult, not less difficult. And therefore, I've always advocated the fact that we need to maintain strong diplomatic presence there and deliberate context, but to the extent possible, not turn these into
circus
public issues
right
that
right
made them, yeah, that made them in some cases more difficult to manage.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that response. And Mr. McCollum, in May 2017, you appeared before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. And you reiterated at that time that Canadian officials, and I quote, work very hard on any cases involving the death penalty. And you said that there were 5 death penalty cases pending at that time, and that Canadian officials were working very hard to persuade the Chinese authorities, as we would work hard to persuade any government authorities not to exercise the death penalty on Canadian citizens. So what types of cases have typically led Canadians to be charged with the death penalty in China? And have Canadian officials been able to secure clemency for Canadians charged with the death penalty in China? And if so, under what circumstances?
Well, thank you for that question. And the Canadian government, I can only speak for the current government, the Liberal government, has been extremely forceful in opposing the death penalty. And I, as ambassador as well, I personally can't stand the death penalty. And the government agrees. And so it is an extremely high priority, whatever the country, including the United States, to prevent death penalties from happening. And so I agree with what Rob said, that, you know, headlines in newspapers don't necessarily help, but constant conversations and pressure, I think, do. The Schellenberg case was particularly egregious. I hope the death penalty won't be carried out, obviously, but he was initially sentenced to a prison term, and then he got sentenced to death on appeal, and he'd been told that couldn't happen. Really difficult case.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I think my time is up.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zan. Maintenant, on va procéder à Jean pendant 6 minutes.
6 minutes, please. Thank you. Before we go any further with the question I intended to ask, I'd like to get back to what you said, Mr. Wright, about the ineffectiveness of raising our voices loud with the Chinese authorities and the ineffectiveness of having very public interventions. I was a bit surprised by this intervention on your part because many witnesses up until now in the framework of this committee, I'd say even the majority of witnesses, including certain former ambassadors, told us exactly the opposite. They said that perhaps it was not really effective to be syrupy sweet to the Chinese government and having a policy of appeasement with Beijing, given the change in attitude since Xi Jinping came to power. That attitude is, on our part, is no longer recommended. That on the contrary, in order to be able to influence the Chinese government, we have to use the same language. That is firm language, clear language that in some regards will not be diplomatic. And you seem to be saying exactly the opposite. So I'd like to hear you on that issue, Mr. Wright. And Mr. McCallum, if you have anything to add, of course.
Sure. It's not so much ineffectiveness. My real comment was that over the period I was there, and I have to remind you, this was 2005 to 2009. It was a different government in China. My experience over that period in time was that headlines didn't resolve issues. Ongoing, consistent, and principled diplomatic contact and discussions did resolve issues. I can't speak for today's environment. I know the situation has changed dramatically, and I know that there's a lot of frustration with actions China has taken in recent years, with good reason. And I can understand why people would be saying now that the kind of diplomacy we practiced over the period I was there hasn't proven to be effective, particularly in dealing with these newer or these other consular cases. I was really just speaking about my own experience. It's certainly not syrupy sweet diplomacy. Anybody who has been engaged in bilateral discussions with the Chinese knows that there's nothing syrupy sweet about it. We went in with tough positions. We explained our positions honestly and frankly to the Chinese, and they gave us frank responses. But I found that approach most effective over the period that we were there, that I was appointed as ambassador in China.
Merci, Monsieur Wright. Monsieur McCallum.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. McCallum, do you have anything to add? Yes, I agree with what my colleague just said. It's also possible that Canada could work with other countries and not in an isolated way, work with Americans and others to obtain certain results. I think that some people suggested that, and that's a good idea. But it doesn't change what Mr. Wright just said, and I agree with him. Thank you very much. Back when you were Minister of Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees, Mr. McCallum, the Chinese government implemented a recruitment program for talented people and established a number of agencies on Canadian territory to proceed with the recruitment of so-called talented people. You as a minister, what brought you to authorize the establishment of these kinds of agencies on Canadian territory? I'm not aware of that. Okay. The Chinese government had agencies in Canada to recruit Canadians to go to China? I don't understand. Well, that's what we understand, in fact. So the question I'd like to ask you, which is complimentary here, what's the objective of the Chinese government in recruiting people on Canadian territory, in your opinion? I don't know. Usually it's the other way around. We recruit people in China. I don't know. Okay, excellent. I'm sorry, but I have no information about that. No, I understand you can't answer. That's something we understand. It happens, of course. Yesterday, with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, we invoked the fact that there's a Chinese company interested in buying a gold mine in northern Nunavut. And we felt that there was some interest that was geostrategic as well as commercial in establishing this company, or the will to acquire this mine. When you were ambassador, did you feel there was any interest on the part of China for northern Canada? Very briefly, please. No. I don't remember any such thing. I don't have any memory of that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron.
Go to Mr. Harris for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. McCallum, the first thing I wanted to ask you, we're talking about visas a few minutes ago with some of my colleagues on the committee. The visas, what we're talking about, are we talking about all categories of visas? Are we looking at diplomatic visas, people seeking to work with the Chinese mission in Canada, or are we talking about all visas that might come your way, or were they only agents of the government? I'd like to have a clarification on that.
Visas, and I think that's a pretty broad category. It's not just people directly working for the government, but it may be government and its various agencies. So there would be large numbers of such visas. Everything is large in China, but we had large numbers of them, and we, as I said, turned down a certain proportion.
And was there general awareness in your time as ambassador in 2017, obviously at the commencement, that there was extensive Chinese attempts to have foreign influence in Canada? Was that part of your briefing when you took on the job?
We certainly knew that that was an issue. And I remember speaking to heads of various universities in Canada and asking them if they thought it was a big problem. And as I recall, most of them at the time did not think it was a huge problem. They were aware of it. They thought it was potentially a problem, but I don't think it had become a great concern at that time. Now, that may have changed now, but back when I was ambassador, we were certainly aware of it. We took certain actions on visas, as I've described. I, as ambassador, spoke to university heads and others, as asking them the extent to which this seemed to be an issue where they worked, and got mixed answers. I always got the impression that it was nothing as serious in Canada as it was allegedly in Australia. But, you know, Australia is a bit of a stalking horse for Canada in the sense that, largely because we have the United States as our neighbor, China is much more important to Australia than it is to Canada. And so Australia is usually several years ahead of us in many ways, including things like free trade agreements and other actions. So often what happens to Australia today is a guide for what might happen to Canada down the road. But I remember that it was more serious for Australia at the time than it was for Canada.
Are you, Mr. McCollum, were you familiar, while you were in China, were you familiar with something called Operation Fox Hunt, which is an involvement between the Chinese security officials and the RCMP within Canada?
I believe that's what I was referring to earlier, when they go and make threats to Chinese people about family back home and things of that kind. Is that right?
In an effort to get them to come back to China, but
Yeah.
we had no extradition treaty with China. Do you know why the RCMP would be involved in that? And would that be something that would work through the Canadian embassy?
The RCMP would certainly not be involved in putting pressure on illegally getting people to go back to China or making threats against them. On the other hand, the RCMP, Canada, does not want to be a haven for criminals. And so if there were cases, we don't have an extradition treaty, but there were some people that we did extradite, or the RCMP did. But it would have to go through the courts. It would have to be fully legal. It would have to be genuine. And there would have to be assurances given by China, certainly on death penalty and possibly other things. So it's not as if we had no contact with the Chinese in terms of serious crime. We did. But we would not have been involved in threats made to Chinese about their families and this kind of thing.
Well, there's a report was just tabled, and it was tabled last March in the House of Commons from the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, which we discussed yesterday at the Public Safety Committee, in which is talked about this Operation Fox Hunt as being going on for several years, and that the situation changed at a certain point. Is that, were you involved in any of that issue at all, as to what was actually going on, and what role was there a diplomatic decision about this happening that you're aware of?
I don't remember that. What I'm telling you, what I do remember is that the RCMP would work with the Chinese on what they regarded as legitimate serious crime, and they would be partners in trying to solve that crime. But they would at the same time try to prohibit, or the Canadian government would try to prohibit, inappropriate pressures put on Chinese in Canada to come back to China.
So are you suggesting that the only filter for people coming into Canada to carry out this type of work or any other potentially intimidatory or coercive character influence would be your visa work?
Very briefly, please.
It's an imperfect process. I'm sure some of those people did get through. But we do our best to stop it when we know about it. And the inspection of visa applications is one approach. Perhaps there are others as well.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you.
And the information from various agencies goes into decisions on visas. It's not just the embassy.
Thank you very much. I'd like to, on behalf of the committee, thank both former ambassadors. I know we all very much appreciate your testimony today. It's certainly good to meet you, Mr. Wright, and good to see you, Mr. McCallum. Again, ceci complète la première partie de notre réunion.
This ends the first part of our meeting. I will now suspend so we can go on to in-camera.
And pass to the in-camera portion.
Nice to see you all.
Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.